Spear claims that the ATA wants to reach out to independent drivers. Drug testing legislation to include hair sample testing for truck drivers. Teamsters ready to walk from UPS Freight should second contract fail. FreightWaves and Jason Schenker talk about the midterm implications for the freight economy. I'm JP.
And I'm Chad.
And we talk about all these issues and more on this week's episode of What the Truck.
All right. Well, we have a fantastic episode in store for everyone today. It's a very politically motivated one.
Oh, yeah.
And I will drink to that. What we'll be ranking our
elections make me drink.
Yeah, because whether they're a big deal or a little deal, it is a lot of sound and fury. Well, we don't know how much it'll signify.
Probably nothing.
But there's lots to talk about. In the meantime, what you hitting on there?
I'm back to my old standard.
Oh.
Yes.
Alas, your single hop.
Descending into the warm, sweet embrace of Bell's Two-Hearted.
Oh, the nostalgia. And
what have you got
even though
on?
you haven't asked.
What do you got going on, Chad?
Thanks for asking.
I'm very interested.
Clearly. I'm drinking Truckstop Honey.
Ooh.
A Truckstop Honey from Back 40 Beer, based in Gadsden, Alabama.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How is it?
It's, you know what I'm happy about this brown is that it doesn't have too much honey. You know, it's a good balance.
More truck stop, less honey.
Yeah. Is that a good thing? No, it's all right. It feels right for the season, and happy to give a shout out to an independent brewery. And so here we are. And the game that we're going to play with our four headlines of the week, JP, and I don't know exactly if our audience is expecting this, so this is a fun thing.
I'm sure they're not.
Is we are going to measure each story on the political BS meter on a scale of 1 to 10.
So we're recording this as, you know, the midterm elections are approaching. We've got a lot of stories about unions and corporations, and you know, we got a story about
legislation,
elections, legislation, lobbyists,
midterm elections coming up by the next time.
All of these talking heads, and we are trying to sort through it and see what's real and what is, you know, not.
And then stay tuned, because we will be playing a scintillating version of Big Deal, Little Deal, and this time we plan on making it under the 2 minutes.
Oh gosh, well, we always plan on making it.
Well, that's true, but I mean, we really, really plan on it.
Okay, all right.
Well, tell me about this. Start us off on this ATA Chris Spears story as we measure the BS meter.
Yeah, so John Kingston wrote this story about Chris Spears' speech at the ATA meeting. He led his usual dog and pony show. For those of you who don't know, the ATA is sort of a vast lobbying organization controlled by the big carriers in trucking. The way that the organization works is that the membership pays dues based on their revenues. And so large companies with large revenues pay a lot of money. Small members don't pay as much money. And you can imagine how that affects the agenda of the organization.
And we did a little research this week, as a matter of fact, and looked at their tax filings to kind of see how large their operating revenue was last year, and it turns out it's a little over $48 million
a year. Yep. So they're pretty big lobbying organization. And
very big in trucking.
Spear talked about some. They dominate trucking. He talked about some interesting things, sort of some initiatives that the ATA membership was trying to push. Where should we start? I mean,
to me, the lead is the interesting part of the agenda, because most of these items on the agenda we've heard a lot, and the new thing that we haven't heard is, I mean, my bullshit meter is really it's going high right now
into the red zone.
They announced the formation. There's no details that have been provided about this, but they announced that this week, which I guess was last week, they will be forming the Independent Contractor Ambassadors Program. So we're waiting.
Wow.
We're desperately awaiting details of this. So their announcement of the independent. This is an interesting title. They're going to be forming an independent contractor ambassadors program. So basically, they're going to start talking to people from the constituency of OIDA, owner operators.
Owner-operators and
Right?
independent drivers. Yeah, and I find that language, independent contractor, so interesting because that's the very sort of employment classification that has been such a center of dispute in all of these lawsuits, right? That is the way that large carriers want to classify drivers and owner-operators who lease their capacity to other carriers, even if they're working under forced dispatch. They still want to call them independent contractors so they can force them into arbitration, and settle, and sort of underpay themselves disputes like this. It's just weird. It's so tone deaf to me that they would call this ambassadorship program independent contractors. What does anyone no one thinks of themselves as an independent contractor. Either you're an owner operator leasing out, or if you're working under forced dispatch, you should be treated like an employee and given all the same rights and benefits that come from a regular employment agreement. It's kind of a weird. I don't get it. And the other thing is of course that it's kind of hilarious that the ATA is. This is their new sort of PR campaign, I guess.
It becomes increasingly clear as one understands the stance after stance of the ATA and their general agenda, that the overall approach is that they are looking to keep pay down. They don't care as much about the quality of the driver. Everything they say, or not everything, but most of the things they say, it's like opposite world. There's a lot of they'll say that the ELDs are about safety, but what is really their agenda, for instance?
Right.
We don't need to digress on that, I guess, right now.
I mean, it's a good example. I mean, because a lot of the large carriers in the ATA were already using electronic logging devices for their own internal data uses and for liability. And they claimed that this was an industry-wide safety thing that the industry needed to have imposed on them. I mean, we could point out...
In the name of safety.
In the name of safety. We could point out that the ATA could have simply required all of its members to use ELDs. They decided not to do that because the real point of it was to force a burdensome regulation on small operators that can undercut and outperform the large carriers or tend to. And so,
right, because they're generally more experienced.
Normally everything that the ATA says is about safety is really about something else. I was thinking along the lines of what you were just saying. I was going to say toward the argument for ATA on their behalf, though, I will say, and this will slightly bring down my BS meter on the ELDs, is that we do want, there is an argument to be made for, we don't need so much fragmentation in the industry. It's nice to have some things that reach across the board. And whether or not even to the argument of ELDs and safety, ELDs are game-changing the industry because finally technology can be truly adopted. And now, as we've seen in 2018, and we've been talking about a lot, we've talked a lot about tech. Right.
And the amount. So ELD, but it's just the language that they use and the motives that, it all goes back to the motive.
The rhetoric of safety is so, just duplicitous, frankly. Because it's just a technology to enforce the hours of service. But yeah, I agree that the ELDs have unlocked a new data-driven phase of trucking, and I think that's really positive. But I certainly don't trust the ATA. And when they talk about you know, the other thing they constantly harp on is allowing 18 to 21-year-olds to get CDLs and drive.
Right. And, you know,
because they want to solve the driver
shortage.
The driver shortage. And we know that large carriers, you know, the dirty little secret is they don't really care that much about driver retention. They don't really care that much about solving. Right. What they want is a compliant, low-paid workforce that they can churn through, that they can create this body of casual labor that they can quickly bring on and offline as market conditions dictate.
And so if you're new sort of to the industry and you suddenly like see on its surface, like, you know, like the ATA arguing for like, hey, 18 to 21 year olds should be allowed to get a CDL and drive for carriers. Look, they already do it in gigantic states, small states that they're allowed to drive in. They already do this. There's no difference. We're just letting them drive, you know, like across whatever their regions or lanes or however national it needs to be. It's not that much of a difference. And on the surface, there's this like pragmatism. It seems like, wow, it's really just solving this driver. It could be just like at least a play towards the end of helping solve the driver shortage problem,
right.
which is originally actually early on in our podcasting, we argued the merits for. Now,
I think
I'm beginning to see
it could work to you know, lower the average age of the driver population.
Yeah, that's a good argument for it.
But you know, the reason why they're doing it is to ultimately to to suppress driver wages.
Right. So you get these 21-year-olds. They're
you
young.
You call them like apprentice drivers or something. You pay them.
Don't have to pay them as much.
Right.
You can increase the churn.
Yep.
They're not going to be as experienced.
They've since they're 18, they've started working. They've already you've got them to decide against college, so they're probably not going to go back. Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, anyway, about their independent contractor ambassadors program, of which there's still no details available, and we reached out to OIDA to see what their commentary might be on it, and they too have no details about this. But they said, the ATA said, these ambassadors will represent independent truckers before key decision makers. So what are they going to be? Are they going to be like these patsies? Like,
that's weird. Yeah.
Yeah, like who are they gonna like? They're gonna find.
They're gonna create these ambassadors to talk for
on behalf
of independent
owner operators, but they're gonna be called independent contractors. Just sounds real sketch. My BS meter just went really high. Yeah, it's in fact, as we conclude this segment of our headlines, my BS meter, JP, is a full 10 out of 10 on this story.
Wow.
I am redlining.
I think I'm at a 9. You know, the lobbyists are going to do what lobbyists do, and the ATA is trying to pull another rabbit out of the hat, and we'll see if anyone buys into this.
All right, so the average ranking of that BS meter then is a 9.5. Okay. As we investigate drug testing legislation to include hair sample testing for truck drivers, this is an interesting story that seems sort of like a bigger deal than maybe it is. But what is kind of interesting to me is that it received almost unanimous bipartisan support in Congress. And essentially, if you're not familiar with the story, its new regulation has passed in both houses of Congress, and the legislation comes after 3 years of failed, new hair testing or new testing protocols that, since 2015 in the FAST Act, which, allowed the FMCSA to start accepting,
hair follicle tests.
Yes.
Yeah. So
there's been nothing that's happened. So
the idea was that the large carriers who have, great exposure to lawsuits, especially around fatalities, have applied these very stringent drug testing regimes that include hair follicle testing, which can detect the use of opioids going back 90 days, whereas urinalysis, maybe it's like 3 to 4 days. And they have asked the FMCSA and the Department of Transportation to create rules where they can submit hair follicle testing, and it'd be like equivalent to urinalysis. Right now, the only kind of drug testing that the FMCSA recognizes is urinalysis.
Right, which just seems a little antiquated. And if you want to be able to have hair analysis like count as your test over urinalysis, you should be able to. And this is what politicians can agree on. This tiny, little, almost meaningless, like slightly different, like kind of like it's. This is the big deal?
It's really what it is. It's the first step that the large carriers are taking to impose hair follicle testing on the entire industry.
So there we go again. If I'm an owner-operator...
This is a replay of the ELD. First, you ask them, hey, we don't have paper logs. We have electronic logs. Can you give us some guidance on making those equivalent? Then, 5 years later, you say, hey, can you make everyone use ELDs? It's all about safety. And I guarantee you this is what's going to happen with hair follicle testing. They're going to say, can you, we have to impose hair follicle testing on the entire industry. There's a statistic that's been quoted, at our office that says that 24% of the drivers who pass a urinalysis test would fail a hair follicle test. And so,
there's lots of stats that can be used.
That would take a massive chunk out of the driver population. It would make it impossible for small carriers that don't have sophisticated online recruiting programs to source drivers, further consolidate the industry, further play into the hands of the very largest carriers.
Well, there you go. There's a summary of it, and that's why my BS meter is really starting to thrum pretty high on this one as well. Look, I know that it's easy to give bipartisan support to. We have an opioid crisis in our country where actually finally the stats are showing that this is the first year where the issue it's plateaued and it's not growing, but it's still a gigantic problem.
And killing more people than car wrecks.
And I can only imagine there's lots of various statistics from various years, and I can only imagine that a lot of truck drivers use stimulants or opioids or smoke pot. Maybe drink and drive, and all sorts of things. But I'm suspect of this particular legislation at this given time. From the powerful lobbying groups, it's going to be it's an expensive test.
Here's the thing. Professional truck drivers are already much safer than your average motorist.
That's what I have come to learn over the past year of covering things in this industry.
It's not about safety. It's about a cost that the large carriers have undertaken to protect themselves against liability. And they now want to use that as a cudgel to hit all of the small carriers with the same cost. They know that they can't bear it, and they know that then they'll drive. They view the small carriers as people just undercutting their rates and their service all the time.
A cudgel. Yes. Whoa, that's the word of the day. And I couldn't agree more. My BS meter on this story, bipartisan support notwithstanding, 9. Giving it a 9, JP.
I'm going to go with a 7.
A 7, I think so much more moderate.
I think that, there's something to be said for identifying drug users who are in control of heavy machinery on public highways. But, there's the surface, the story on the surface, and then there's what's, reading between the lines, what it's really about.
Well, and in between the lines are the mean of the BS meter then is 8 on that particular story. Okay. The Teamsters, JP, are ready to walk from UPS Freight should this second contract fail. You want to give us the background on this situation?
So this isn't the same thing as the UPS ground drivers who had that controversial contract ratified, even though a majority of the membership had declined it. So this is different. This is UPS Freight, which is their LTL side, people who haul palletized freight. also unionized, also, like many other LTL companies, ArcBest and YRC. It's organized by the Teamsters, and I feel like
the employees will vote between this November 9th and 11th. And so after November 12th is what we're going to understand is like if they either accept the terms that UPS Freight is saying, this is our best offer, we're not going to continue to negotiate, and they're saying, look, on a couple of terms such as you guys hiring extra subcontractors during busy seasons, and we've UPS feels like they've conceded, and the Teamsters are saying that you haven't moved the needle at all, and also like UPS has. UPS Freight feels like they've conceded by also paying drivers normal wages, even when they're performing these non-driving duties, such as dock work. So they've conceded on that. They're going to pay them, which seems exceedingly fair. Like they should be paying them for that.
Oh yeah, that's like side work at a restaurant. Like like we have to be paid minimum wage for that.
If you're working, you're working.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and so the concessions have been made, but the Teamsters are still not happy. They have a dissident group within the Teamsters called the Teamsters for a Democratic Union.
Those people sound pretty hardcore,
and they've called the new negotiations. They've called it a turd
and an insult.
And insulting, yes.
Those people sound interesting. On the one hand, I'm like, okay, are these like actually like crazy, like revolutionary leftists? On the other hand, when they say a democratic union, I wonder if what they're really complaining about is like the corruption of the Teamster leadership.
Ooh.
You know what I mean? They want the leadership to respond more to the rank and file. So that's kind of interesting.
But they're in the minority, and we're talking overall about 12,000 workers. These Teamsters.
Oh yeah.
12. Well, I mean that is
12,000 drivers. Yeah, huge.
It's considerable. I
think they're bluffing a little bit. If you pay attention to Teamster negotiations, if you pay attention to labor disputes at UPS, I mean there were drivers who threatened to go on strike around this time.
Almost all the time. It's their only real leverage.
Well, it always had. Like I remember last December, things were popping off, and the Teamsters said they were going to walk out, go on strike. Like they always try to use this like peak season opportunity to try to put pressure. And whatever. I mean, UPS. Here's the thing about UPS. They've got a near monopoly on the parcel market. They're one of the largest, most profitable transportation companies in the world.
They had terrific third quarter earnings.
Most of the LTL competition, leaving aside Old Dominion and FedEx Freight, is already unionized as well. So their complaints about competitive advantage are less than convincing. On the other hand, the Teamsters.
But how do you remain competitive? You remain competitive by not having as many fixed costs. You have to measure these things. You have to know.
True.
So
true. And I wonder what the actual numbers are for their use of subcontractors during.
That is one part that
surges.
we don't have.
I would like to know that. Like on the one hand, it's all specified by contract, so they have to guarantee a certain number of jobs to Teamsters, and then when freight goes above that by a certain amount, they can start subcontracting things out. Obviously, both sides are going to try to play with the numbers to argue their point. I do know that paying Teamsters overtime is not... You're probably not going to make money like that. So I could see why they would subcontract things out if they could.
I am going to call this. Can I go ahead and call it on my BS meter?
Sure.
I'm going to call it a 7, and more of a 7 from the point of view of the Teamsters. More of like they're bluffing. The concessions have been made. I don't know you're really going to strike during the holiday?
Right.
Okay.
It's been a long time since UPS workers have gone on strike.
What about you? How are you going to affect the
I'm
meme?
kind of at a 5. Just I'm not. These both sides play these hardball sort of public bluffing games. It's a bit of
A 5. It's very moderate. Then
it's a bit of liar's poker. It's you're just trying to make the other side blink. Make yourself look good. That's why everyone's talking to the press about it, right? So I just think that I think that it's a difficult relationship.
So we give it a 6.
Obviously, these people are doing a great job. UPS is performing very well. On the other hand, the Teamsters will destroy your company from the inside if you let them.
Ooh. Well, that's a powerful statement to end on. Why don't we segue to our final headline of the week, in which we hosted a webinar with Jason Schenker, a renowned economist, and he was talking about the midterm.
He's the principal at Prestige Economics. He's on Bloomberg News all the time.
Chairman of the Futurist Institute.
Yeah. He's a really smart guy, does a lot of research, does a lot of forecasting for commodities prices, equities, bonds, currencies. Really interesting guy to talk to. Kind of has this view from the top of Mount Olympus. And it was cool too. I talked to him we had a chat for about 30 minutes on a webinar earlier this week.
Well, he's also promoting a new book, which we'll give him a shout out on. It's called Midterm Economics, which we're rushing right up towards the midterms. Midterm Economics, the impact of midterm elections on financial markets and the economy. And he's done some interesting research, and that's what we talked about.
It's that. I kind of think you could flip that the other way around. It could also be called the impact of financial markets and the economy on midterm elections.
Oh,
there's an interesting sort of push-pull kind of
yin and yang, paradoxical, kind of thing.
But we had a pretty good conversation. You wrote about it. What did you think?
Well, I was just listening in on y'all's conversation and documenting it. What did I think? I thought that I liked I liked the scope and concept of the project, and I haven't read the book, and I think that it may have some really revealing information, but in a lot of ways, it didn't seem like maybe there was a ton a lot of information to draw from historically to necessarily get super historically
get super statistically sort of robust. We're talking really about the post-war period, starting with Truman, modern party structures, that kind of thing.
One thing he did point out that I thought was really interesting, and I don't know about you, but he said that a lot of people have been saying that this midterm election cycle is a lot like the 2010 midterm election cycle, and he was like, on what planet are these people thinking? And here's a huge, indicator, not even necessarily a midterm indicator, but it was in this case, is unemployment. Unemployment now, this is a big stat of the conversation, is at 3.7%, which is the lowest it's ever been since 1969. And in fact, I don't know when it was lower than that before, but I keep hearing it's never been as low as it was since 1969. And in 2010, it was 10%. And those Democrats, those incumbents were just swept away and really got hammered. So in this case, those comparisons are really not similar at all. But in point of fact, it's more like, and this was interesting to me, the 2000 actually, the 2000 general election.
Right.
So that's a bit of a difference.
This will be a general election, but the 2000 presidential election.
But he was referring by general. It was the presidential. Was the way that I thought we were talking about it. Yeah. And at that time, he pointed out there was some frothiness in that respect.
In the economy,
it was contentious.
So there's a tech bubble.
There was a tech bubble.
There are sort of...
But you still had dissatisfaction with the system.
You were at the tail end of a very long expansion. People still being dissatisfied. the issues that were driving political debate were not necessarily economic ones, similar to now. Like you don't see people, you don't see candidates talking about how they're going to improve the economy or do this or that better. Like it's no one's really touching that. No one really wants to claim credit for it. No one is really trying to take ownership of the 2019 and 2020 economies. You know what I mean? By saying like, if you liked me, we'll continue, 3.5% GDP. No one's saying that.
Another interesting aspect of the conversation that I thought was relevant and interesting. He was like, look, so we're hearing a lot about like how compelling and important it is to vote. And I don't mean to take the steam out of anybody's punch, but like, so to speak, but in a lot of ways, in terms like of economics, it doesn't really matter which side wins.
Right.
He pointed out that what if every single Democratic seat won over the midterm elections on every single level? You're still not going to be able to have the kind of impact that it would create to impeach the president so that his trade policies are stopped in their
So to back up for a second,
yeah,
Schenker said that there were the three biggest risk factors to the American economy, including the freight economy, were monetary policy, trade policy, and overall levels of government debt. And he said that no matter who wins the election in the midterms, regardless of the results of this particular midterm election, none of those three risk factors will be altered. He said that, firstly, monetary policy set by the Fed, Chairman Jay Powell,
is not expected to change.
He's not going to change.
He's there for the next 6 years.
Yeah, and the whole point is that of the Fed is that they're fairly immune from politics. Two, the trade policy, and by Trump's trade policy, we mean the protectionism and the trade war
Tariffs,
with China.
Yeah.
That is baked into the worldview of the Trump administration. If you look at Peter Navarro, who's one of his main advisors, he's written several books about China. This is a very well-developed position that is deeply entrenched in the administration. Thirdly, government debt,
either party is going to incur more debt.
Either party is going to incur more debt. Yeah. And even if the Democrats win the House, which they are expected to do, divided government, and by that we mean,
Senate majority of Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah. So right now we don't have a divided government.
Right.
But if we do go back to a divided government, that's likely to increase the government debt even faster, because what tends to happen to get bipartisan support for legislation. So if the Democratic House passes a bill that then the Republican Senate also has to pass to send it to the White House, what tends to happen is that the Democrats will, you have to spend money, you have to increase spending to get the Democrats on board, while simultaneously cutting taxes to get the Republicans on board, right? So you're spending money you don't have, and so that increases the debt that much faster.
So these were interesting aspects of what he was saying. And also, I think leading up to... so let's get through... We get through the midterms, whatever happens, happens. And then he pointed out, and a lot of people may know this, but there is one single factor that over the past 100 years has been the leading economic indicator as to whether a president will get reelected or not.
Yeah, and that is unemployment. If the unemployment rate increases between the midterm of the president's first term,
so right now the bar's set pretty like but in other words, my understanding is he's saying if it increases from the 3.7% that it is now over the next 2 years leading up to the general election, that basically history tells us that Trump will not be voted back because there are 4 cases over the past 100 years where this has happened. And it was Hoover, Carter, it was George W.H. Bush. What was the? I'm forgetting.
H.W. Bush.
I'm forgetting. There's one other.
One was.
We're both forgetting it.
Is it? Yeah, I can't remember.
But there's been 4 cases of it, and so in the history of all the time, it's always, and for some kind, I didn't understand this part. For some reason, it generally trends upward after a midterm election. Like generally speaking, towards a general presidential election, the economy, the unemployment rate goes down. So that's why regularly
presidents get
incumbents
are
reelected.
Normally reelected, and then when the unemployment rate goes up, they are punished for that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. A lot of people think that there is a good chance that the tech bubble will burst, that equities will keep stumbling forward and maybe falling into 2019, that the lack of synchronized growth in global markets, especially emerging markets, could put downward pressure on oil prices, which will now hurt the American economy. There's a lot of different.
There's a lot of variables, and that's why maybe we don't have enough.
Housing starts have already kind of, the price of real estate went too high, destroyed demand. Now housing starts are way down.
Well, and so I would say my political BS meter on this, I'm going to go really low on this because I didn't detect a lot of BS. I think there may be BS in some of the the ways that we have to interpret the stats. I'm going to go 2.
Yeah, I'm going to go 3 because not to throw shade at Jason. I think his book is excellent and he gave a lot of insight, but I just think that it casts light on the BS peddled by politicians who are giving economic promises. Right. Okay,
so we have so 2.5 is our mean on that, and what an exciting time to talk about politics, and so fun to have a theme of that with from our logistics perspective. It is time to play Big Deal, Little Deal. What is the deal with you?
All right, let's do it.
All right, so ready or not, here we go. XPO drivers in New Jersey agree to join Teamsters Big Deal or Little Deal.
It's a big deal. XPO is the new juicy target for the Teamsters, and we'll see whether they go the way of most other LTL carriers.
Trucking carriers shift capacity to capture port volumes. Big deal or little deal?
It's a little deal. It's temporary and predictable, but it created some volatility in capacity and volumes.
Uptake taps into geotab sensors, AI to take predictive maintenance a step further. Big deal or little deal?
It's a little deal. Navistar is also using AI to create intelligent predictive maintenance capabilities.
To reduce traffic pollution, delivery services hop on the bike. Big deal or little deal?
It's a big deal because when you look at this article by Linda Baker, our new West Coast correspondent, the people trying out the e-bikes are huge. UPS, for example. Manufacturing and not e-commerce is the decisive factor of international air cargo growth. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal. It remains B2B for now, and economics is growing, just not at the expected rate. Freight forwarders still control the market.
FreightWaves partners with Benzinga to bring freight market news to the masses. Big deal or little deal?
Big deal. We have an agreement in place to add 20 million readers to channels we didn't have access to.
Brent WTI spread widens. Crude prices propped up by supply worries. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal. There's still plenty of reason to remain bullish on oil for now. Let's gauge it in another week.
Final phase of I-269 opens, allowing trucks to bypass Memphis traffic. Big deal or little deal?
It's a big deal for truckers and traffic running through that congested corridor. And every little bit of infrastructure helps, but in the grand scheme of things, little deal.
Did we do it?
We did it!
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it!
I'm pretty sure! Yes! Oh, it's fun how we can evaluate ourselves at the end of each of these games.
Wow, we're awesome.
Yeah, rock on. And everyone out there in Freightland,
we will catch you next week.
As always, we go into more detail about each of the topics we've talked about today on our website, freightwaves.com. We will continue to publish this podcast weekly, so be sure to subscribe to What the Truck on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Also, make sure to leave us a review to let us know what you think of our new podcast.
And if you're interested in freight economics and finance, come to our MarketWaves conference at the Gaylord Texan Resort and Convention Center in Grapevine, Texas this November. Visit marketwaves18.com to learn more about this event.
That'll do it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week on What the Truck.